Hi everyone, this is your host and your coach Mary Ayers, and welcome to the show today because we're going to really be looking at, am I a perfectionist? We're going to look at what is perfectionism, how did we get it, and what's the cost of living in that? How does it hold us back? And of course, we're going to be doing some tapping about how to get rid of it, or at least to move through it. What I want to let people know is that when we have picked up some of these ongoing ways of being, a way of approaching life that we've been living with for many, many years, 30, 40, 50 years, that there's a real good chance that one single tapping is not going to make a huge difference. In other words, you're not going to get rid of all your perfectionist traits and the way you believe and see things just because you do some simple tapping today. I mean, come on, if this was possible, you wouldn't need to be listening to this program because you would have already done that tapping, it would have already cleared, and you would be going on your way in a much more calm and confident way. But it's when we recognize it and we are doing some of the tapping on the stories about it, we start to change the questions that we ask ourselves. And the questions that we are asking ourselves is what directs our focus and our behavior. So when our questions change, so do the things that we focus on, so do our behaviors, and hence, so does our life. So where do we begin? So how do you know if you are a perfectionist? Well, the funny thing is that a lot of perfectionists believe that they are setting very high standards for themselves. They say that I have high standards, I need to live by them, I hold other people by them, and there's nothing wrong with having high standards. It's good. It gives you a strong work ethic, and that may be true. No qualm whatsoever in being somebody who sets a high standard. However, the problem with perfectionism is that it's very all or nothing. You either did a perfect job or you did a bad job. In other words, any mistakes, anything that is less than being seen as perfect is seen as a failure. So it leaves very little room for learning, because in order to be a learner, you have to be willing to kind of fall down and be incompetent, but not so with a perfectionist. The idea behind that is that I have to do it right. I have to do it right from the beginning, although logically, you may say to yourself, that's not true. Everybody has to learn. Give yourself some room to be a learner, to make mistakes. Logically, learning makes sense. However, we are talking about the feelings that come up with having to get it right. And if I don't get it right, or I do less than what I consider to be perfect work, hitting that high standard, it's the cost to ourselves of feeling like a failure, feeling that we aren't as good, that we don't measure up. And that is really difficult to live with. Now, some people may go, I lived with a perfectionist, and that was very difficult growing up with somebody who had those kind of standards. And goodness me, there is tons of tapping we can do if you grew up with a perfectionist, because that puts a whole different slant on life. But we're talking right now just us having developed these really strong standards. I'll give you a little bit of a clue, is a lot of times perfectionists have a lot of I should statements. I should be able to do it this way. I should be able to get it in on this time. I should be able to do that in a maybe a short period of time, or get it in on this date and have it look this particular way. And you know what I'm talking about if you can relate to this. These should statements that are very definitive. They're a way of looking at the world that says it's very black and white, that anything less than that is substandard. How does one become a perfectionist? Well, it's not black and white here either. Some research will point to temperament. Some people have a temperament and a temperament means how you take in the world and what it means to you and the way you come up to conclusions. Some people are more sensitive than other people. For other people, they can let things roll off their back a little bit easier. I know my husband always laughed. He was raised in Seattle. He goes, it's kind of like being like a duck. The water just rolls off your back. Some people take things in and personalize them a little bit more than, say, somebody else would, even another sibling. What I want you to know about this, though, is no matter if you have a temperament that tends to take things in, maybe it's being sensitive, personalizing things, it is not a fault of yours, and it doesn't mean that you can't move beyond it. That's the first thing I want to say. Sometimes we can look at something and we can say that's my temperament, as if there are good temperaments and bad temperaments. I should be this way and I shouldn't be that way. And notice, as soon as I made that should statement again, there's that way of looking at it black or white, right or wrong. And when we look at things in these very rigid ways where we don't fit into the mold, then we're immediately into that reject, something's wrong with me pile. And so part of what I'm doing right now is helping you to realize and think about the things you say. Think about the way you say them internally is going to give you some clues as how you see the world. Is it safe to be a learner? Is it safe to take risks, to learn? And if it doesn't feel comfortable for you to do that, you need to feel the sense of I have to get it right first. It means you just might have a little bit of this perfectionist tendency, and that we can still tap on that. So besides temperament, people may have been raised in a household where somebody had, as I mentioned before, very high standards, and you felt the need to meet their standards, that approval meant doing something in a way that somebody else would give you outside approval. Now, everybody wants and enjoys approval. And what can happen is that we learn how good it feels when we've done something right and we've gotten that praise. And so then we start to equate that with our worth. That when I do well, I feel good, I feel worthy. And when I'm not getting that I don't feel as good. And so for some children, it becomes I don't want to say a game, but it becomes a way of life, is to see how they can get that approval. And because they've equated it with feeling good. And so now they're striving to get that approval in order to get that good feeling. And then that becomes kind of habitual. And then we start making some rules in our head that says the only way I can feel good is when I'm doing really, really well. And I don't feel good unless it's perfect. And next thing you know, these things roll into perfectionism over the years. It may not have started as that. After all, we're just a child and we're trying to make rules about the world. And we may say things to ourselves like, this works really well for me. I like when I'm doing really well because I get A's in class and I get to sit up front and I get to be the teacher's pet and all the other kids think that I'm really wonderful and I get accolades from my parents. And when I don't get that, it doesn't feel good. I don't feel noticed. I don't feel appreciated. And so now a habit becomes developed that says, I have to have that in order to feel good. Something else that can happen for us is thinking that we wouldn't get in trouble, that we wouldn't cause our parents displeasure as children if we could only be good, if we could be right, if we could be perfect. If you were raised in a house with grumpy parents, angry parents, and you didn't know how to keep yourself under the radar or safe, or it just was a household that felt really stiff, and when you did things right, it can become a idea that we get early on that says, if I could only be good enough, perfect enough, quiet enough, good enough, then I am in control and I can help keep the violence down. I can keep the anger down. I can keep the tension down. And so again, it might have started out as a way to survive, something that we learned growing up in a hopes to keep our anxiety down. And that's what I want to say, no matter all of these different ways we might get that, acquire this perfectionist trait, is that it's usually to keep our anxiety down. And so it's that spike in anxiety that we think, well, if I can just get it right, I will be able to feel better. I'll be able to feel calm. So the cost of being a perfectionist, though, is, and having such high standards, is that procrastination, interestingly enough, for a lot of people who have perfectionist issues also have procrastination issues. And here's how that settles itself out, is that if I can't do 100% of the job, if I can't get it absolutely correct, we put it off, we stall. And so for some people, they've become really adept at being a procrastinator in the hopes of being able to put off the idea that they're not going to be able to do a good enough job. And then what happens is that then they have to rush the job because they're probably under some kind of a deadline. They know it isn't as good, and so that when they get a bad grade on it, or if it isn't accepted in some way, it gets critiqued or criticized, well, what can happen is that they say, well, the reason it happened is that because I didn't give it enough time, and so I could get it right. I could have gotten it perfect, but I didn't leave myself enough time. So interestingly enough, perfectionism can be a big component of procrastination. The other cost is that sometimes people give up easily. If they didn't get it the first time, again, I mentioned learning, how we learn that we have to be willing to be a beginner. That is so uncomfortable for some people that they give up easily. If they don't get it within the first or second try, they just go ahead and give up. Another issue that may come up with this is you spend a lot of time. So people will really work on things, always needing to redo sometimes. Things never get done. That book never gets written because they keep rewriting. They take their time. They go back over. They make changes. It's this endless process that never seems to end because they're trying to get it just right. And it also, of course, can lead to avoiding new experiences, doing anything new, because, of course, doing something new requires us to have some learning, to go from a place where we don't know, go through learning, and then we make mistakes. We're not great at it at first in order to be able to become good at something. Not perfect, but even good at something. So sometimes people can live very small lives with perfectionism because they're afraid of trying new things, so that they don't make any mistakes. So if this resonates with you, if you're saying, oh my gosh, I think sometimes I am a perfectionist, maybe that does get in the way. I think I should be doing it right all the time. I don't want to do it anything less than because I don't want people to think I'm not smart, or whatever you are resonating with right now. Even if you're not a full-blown perfectionist, we all may have a little bit of perfectionist traits. So we're going to do some tapping on that idea, the anxiety that comes up with, I have to get it right or I'm a failure. I have to get it right or people will think less of me. Think about that. Feel it in your body on a scale of 0 to 10. How true does that feel for you? Does it really feel like that really resonates with me? I see myself in the description you gave, Mary. If that's the case, your answer is going to be a 10. Feel it in your body. Right now, it's conviction that you have about, yes, I need to get it absolutely right. I should be getting it right. It's right for me to have high standards, all right? And you may have some ideas of where you got it. You might want to jot those down. Those are other things you can tap on, things that were said to you, examples you had, people who modeled it for you. Who was that person that you may have watched get anxious about having to get it right? Maybe it could have been a wonderful mom who felt that the house had to be just right. And you could see their anxiety about that, or that when you did things perfect or you did things in a way that was pleasing to them, that you got strong accolades and it seemed to put them at ease. And so you know that part of your perfectionism has to do with wanting to make somebody else feel good. Whatever your story is, it becomes your tapping target. We're going to tap a little bit just on the whole feeling of having to get it right. So let's use some real-time example here. I want you to think about a task that maybe you've been putting off, not getting to. And it could be anything, because after all, when you have this real all or nothing way of looking at the world, small things could be happening. You may not get paperwork filed away because in your mind you're thinking to yourself, well, I have to have the right filing system, and I would have to go all the way back through things, and I would have to have files and da 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 da. You know what I'm talking about here, because it's almost as you realize the reason I haven't gotten around to that is because I have all these other things have to be put into place in order for me to do it. That can very much be a perfectionism trait. So think of an action, a activity that you are not getting to, perhaps because the feeling is it's got to be right. I've got to have this just right. Could be making phone calls around your business. It could be setting up your website. It's got to be absolutely right. I need to have the right words on my website. Whatever it is, I want you to think about it. And think about this idea that it has to be right. I can't do anything on this until I've got it completely right. Feel it in your body. Write down your number when it comes to how strong that feels, how true that is. We're going to start on the karate chop spot. Even though it has to be right. This thing I need to do, it has to be right. And there's a part of me that thinks this is good. I have strong work ethics. It's good that I have such high standards. And there's a possibility that I may be a perfectionist, that I'm just trying to put this off. Because unless I do it right, it's going to feel really uncomfortable. And I'm open to the idea that I can accept myself right now, even if I'm not perfect. Even though it has to be perfect. I have to get it right. If I don't, I'll feel like a failure. I won't get their approval. That's okay. I'm going to start now accepting myself, even though I'm not perfect. Even though I'm trying to be perfect. I need to get it right. It feels so good when I get their comments. All those accolades. Job well done. It hurts so badly when I don't think I've done enough. And sometimes I put it off. And it is so stressful. I have to get it right. It has to be perfect. And maybe I can start right now by giving myself a little break and learning to accept myself right now in my imperfection. At the eyebrow, I have to be perfect. Side of the eye, it has to be perfect. Under the eye, I can't make any more headway on this. Under the nose, unless I'm 100% correct. On the chin, unless I'm 100% sure. Collarbone, that I'm going to do it right. Under the arm, it all has to be correct. Top of the head, it has to meet my standards. Back of the eyebrow, and I have really high standards. Side of the eye, and that's a sign of strong work ethics. Underneath the eye, I remember being told as a child. Under the nose, if it's worth doing. On the chin, it's worth doing right. Collarbone, so do it right the first time. Under the arm, nobody left any room for learning. Top of the head, but I didn't know that then. Back at the eyebrow, I thought the message was side of the eye, and the expectation was under the eye that you do it right under the nose the very first time. On the chin. So I thought it meant collarbone, that if it wasn't right the first time, under the arm, that there was something wrong with me. Top of the head. That's how I took it in. Back at the eyebrow. That's the meaning I gave it. Side of the eye. And I wonder if it's possible now, under the eye, that when I see it in that light, under the nose, I can think of a different way to approach this. On the chin. What if it's possible for me to be a learner? Collarbone. Because people who are learning under the arm are willing to begin. Top of the head, knowing that they have a learning curve. Back at the eyebrow, knowing that they will get a second chance. Side of the eye, or a third chance. Under the eye, that the more that they know, under the nose, becomes a way of learning more. On the chin. And then you can give yourself permission, collarbone, to get better at it. Under the arm. So if I can start a project, top of the head, and make some headway on it, back at the eyebrow, I can always add more to it later. Side of the eye, or not, under the eye. It might be just enough for right now. Under the nose, I could begin. On the chin, because beginning is better than perfect. Collarbone, done is better than perfect. Under the arm, what if I was becoming a completer? Top of the head, and that was so much better than having to do it perfectly. Take a breath. Now I introduce some ideas to you. I like to be able to seed the subconscious a little bit and introduce some ideas. Now that you are aware of the way we might think and the way we might feel about having to have things perfect, I want you to entertain a new idea. And that is the idea that how beginning is where you get successful. And I have a sign printed up that done is better than perfect. Write that up, print it out, and hang it up. Done is even better than perfect. You can always go back and add. That's the beauty of it. You get to be a completer. Completers don't wait for everything to be 100% perfect. They get their success and their good feelings from having something completed, knowing that they can go back and add to it. That beginning and getting movement is really the celebration. So while you may not have embraced it completely right now, I want you to listen to this recording again. There are many, many times for you to go back and hear this because you're going to think of new ways that you have learned to be perfectionist and the way you've been thinking about your world and how you feel and what it means about your worthiness if you could only be perfect at it. So you're going to start to look at new ways of explaining the world. What will that look like for you? How are you going to explain something that is coming in less than the high standard, but yet you're still applying yourself? You got it done. You are learning, you make room for additions, amendments, for new ideas to come in it. What will you be saying to yourself that will allow you more space in this black or white way of looking at things? Perfectionism is definitely one of those things that gets in the way of us taking action. All of my programs that I work when I'm working with people are about helping them move through the fear and anxiety so that they can get in action. All right, so this is your coach, Mary Ayers. I always love hearing from you. You can email me at mary@tapintooaction.com. I love getting your feedback. And until next time, stay brilliant.